Hi, welcome back to Storybreak. I'm Mike Champagne, and this is my web channel. If you're new to Storybreak, this web channel was created to give you a chance to take a break for yourself and just listen to a story. This new story that we'll be hearing today is one called Trouble. It's about a little dog. Now, strange as it may seem, not everyone loves dogs, but sometimes it takes a while for people to understand just exactly what dogs are about. So for your enjoyment, and I hope your relaxation, here comes Trouble. Well, I never knew his name. Ours was the perfect urban relationship. Mutual acknowledgement of our coinciding routines, but no desire to extend the relationship past that. It was safer that way. No entanglements, no danger of familiarity or friendship and the burdens that implied. He was disabled. He had a prosthetic on his right leg, youngish, about 40, I guess, and apparently a loner. I never saw him talking to anyone. Every morning, as I passed through the little park in our regentrified neighborhood, I would see him hobbling up the tight little hill from the entrance, his arms loaded down with a throw stick and a ball, treats, a leash, waste bags, and an assortment of paraphernalia associated with dog ownership. He carried it all with him as he lurched up the hill on his crutches, and a raggedy little dog on an extensor leash dragging behind him, resisting his every encouragement. I would nod, he would nod back, but we never exchanged actual words. It was always early, and the doggy people were out in force. You get to know them on sight if you pass through these vest pocket parks in the city. They're always early to take advantage of the leash laws, which permit them to run their dogs off leash until 8 a.m. They're a chummy lot, full of camaraderie and high spirits, which at that hour of the morning is enough to curdle the milk of human kindness. I'd hear them as I passed by, calling out to each other and their dogs. Everyone seemed to know everyone else, and they freely talked about each other's animals with an intimacy one expects from parents at a preschool, rhapsodizing their human children. I suppose that was to be expected. They often waved to me and said, "Good morning," and I'd return the greeting and smile, but I was always glad to clear the gauntlet of cheerful owners and curious dogs sniffing and whining, and all that smiling. Mercifully, he was not one of those. When I got to the other side, he was always there, my urban counterpart. We exchanged civil nods, and the day proceeded with a reassuring regularity. I confess I was curious about his disability, and I had made up all kinds of stories in my head about its origins, as you do. I finally decided that he was a veteran and that he must be living on some sort of government pension, trying to put his life together after the horrific events of a distant tragic explosion. So, in my mind, I called him the soldier. It was the habit of the soldier to unleash his raggedy little animal after he entered the park. Like his owner, the dog seemed uninterested in company. He stayed completely away from the other dogs running free. Instead, he would run as fast as he could up the side of the hill and turn and stare at his master. The soldier would call him anxiously, "Trouble, come! Trouble, come!" But the little dog would lean back slightly in defiance and stare back at him, refusing to return. The soldier would have to scale the hill, a painful process to watch, in an attempt to releash the little black dog. As he neared the animal, it would bark once and run a little further off, causing the owner to drag himself still further up the hill. I don't know how long this process would go on. I never stayed long enough to see its conclusion, but every morning Trouble and the soldier would repeat the performance. Every morning he would unleash the dog, and every morning the hateful little animal would make him climb that hill, never once coming when called. I wasn't sure if I admired the soldier's persistence or deplored his poor judgment. Why free the dog? Keep him leashed. He would never have to chase him up the hill. I don't know why he kept the little beast. Why continue in this pointless exercise? But every morning the two would play out the same game. The dog seemed totally incapable of learning to obey, and the soldier would not give up on him. When the winter drew on, it was always harder to watch this dance. The walkways were icy and treacherous, and I worried that the soldier would fall and injure himself. I worried that such an injury would force the soldier to surrender his independent existence, or worse, call for help from the doggy people, or perhaps even myself. Every morning, no matter how cold the weather, the two were there, and so we continued, fall to winter, winter to spring, and finally summer. In summer, I saw a change in this steady pageant for the first time. One morning, as I topped the hill, and I had threaded past the good mornings and the gaggle of sniffing, barking, whining dogs, the soldier was down on one knee, holding his dog. The little black beast was off his leash, but was being restrained by the soldier's hand on his halter. The soldier planted the dog down on the pavement with a firm "Sit, stay." The dog's little eyes blazed with defiance, but he was powerless to move as long as the soldier's hand was on him. "Sit, stay," intoned the man, and the dog seemed to look around him for some means of escape. He, of course, did not sit until the soldier's firm hand pushed his rump to the walk. Once the hand was removed, the dog would stand again and strain at the halter, trying to run. This happened several times until, finally, the dog sat. I was amazed. The little dog actually dropped his rear to the pavement in reluctant obedience and sat with daring eyes watching the soldier. "Good," intoned the soldier, and immediately the man produced a treat which the dog ate greedily. After the third or fourth successful "sit, stay," I was almost as exultant as the soldier seemed. He gave the dog another treat and tried again, but this time he rose painfully and dragged himself 8 or 10 feet away, and holding out yet another reward, said in the same commanding voice, "Trouble, come!" As if on cue, the dog sprang to his feet and ran part way up the hill, as was his custom. "Trouble, come!" But the dog would not obey. He took the same defiant stance and forced his master to fetch him as he rose higher and higher up the embankment. I was as crushed by the dog's infuriating behavior as I was sure the soldier must be. For the briefest moment, he had succeeded only to have the demonic little animal revert to his stubborn ways again. And yet I never saw the soldier lose his temper. He never shouted or cursed or showed the least animosity to the raggedy little devil standing on the hill. He hobbled up the hill with patient determination to retrieve his little black dog. In the successive months, I watched the two going through the motions of a training which I had come to view with fatalistic surrender. The dog was never going to obey the soldier, and the soldier was never going to give up trying to train the dog. It's almost as if they were part of some cosmic clockwork. You wound them up, and they always did the same thing. It was eternal, maddening, and sadly comic. One morning, as I crested the hill, and I had made my return greetings to the dogs and owners alike, I arrived at our usual nodding point, and to my surprise, neither the dog nor the owner were there. I stopped in my tracks and looked about, thinking that, perhaps I was off my schedule, or that some twist of fate had consigned the two fixtures of my morning pass through the park to some alternate universe. This is truly curious. It worried me for the rest of the day. On the next day, neither appeared again, and the day after that, I was bereft. My morning had lost its anchor, and I was adrift in an uneasy suspicion of the end of times. Finally, on the 5th morning of their absence, as I was passing the doggy people, I overheard one of them say, "They found him. He'd been dead for 2 days at least. The dog's in the park. Saw him yesterday, but I couldn't get near him." I confess I slacked my pace to hear as much of the conversation as I could discreetly hear. I made the assumption that they were talking about the soldier and his dog. This was awful. The world was out of balance. My mornings were destroyed already without them, and now to hear of the soldier's demise and the loss of his dog, it shook me. At first, I told myself that it was someone else of their own persuasion who had died. It wasn't the soldier or trouble. It couldn't be. However, as the mornings collected without their appearance at the entrance to the park, I concluded it must have been the soldier to whom they were referring. What of the dog? What of trouble? At times I would hear one of the morning gatherers mention, "Can't get to him, runs away every time. He's going to starve, he'll get hit by a car." It disturbed me to think of the soldier's patience being lost so completely by his dog also suffering some accident. It seemed so unfair, so wrong for the animal to be without the man. I confess, I kept an eye out for the dog as I passed through the park. I didn't know what I would have done if I had seen him, but I did nonetheless try to spot him. 2 weeks went by. References to the missing dog by the early morning walkers faded to silence. No one seemed to think about it anymore. The entire park seemed to offer nothing more than a collective shrug of indifference to the loss of the soldier and his dog. I clung to the memory, but I didn't know them, not really. Then, one morning, as if by magic, I saw the dog. I crossed the hill and approached the park entrance, lost in my own thoughts, when out of the corner of my eye I caught sight of a raggedy little black figure standing halfway up the hill, staring at me. I turned to look, and the stance was unmistakable. The animal was filthy and snarled. It had grown thin, but the stance was perfect. The dog stood there in that half-crouched, defiant way it had done all those times with his master. It was almost as if he was daring me to call him so that he could run away up the hill and have me pursue him. I don't know if he attached me to that routine in his little mind, but at that moment there was a flash of mutual recognition. What should I do? I surmised that no one had been able to approach the beast, and judging by its present condition, I didn't expect it could hold out for much longer. I thought of his master, the soldier, and how patiently he had worked to train the stubborn little dog to no avail. Well, there was nothing for it, so I dropped to one knee. In the same tone of voice I had heard so often from the soldier, I intoned, "Trouble, come!" The dog picked up its ears and didn't move. I tried again, "Trouble, come!" This time the dog whined slightly and hesitantly dropped down the side of the hill, slowly approaching me. When he reached me, I could see that he was in a sad state indeed. He trembled and fought the instinct to run. It was only my tone and the familiar command which had brought him to me. I reached out for the animal, and he collapsed into my arms. Hunger and privation had made him surrender, but I knew it was something else. Loneliness. The little dog nestled itself under my arm as I rose to my feet. Now that I had him, what do I do with him? I couldn't bear the thought of taking him to that clan of doggy-coddling simperers. If I turned the animal over to the authorities in its present condition, I was certain he would be disposed of, and that was unacceptable. I knew no one well enough socially to whom I could suggest assuming ownership. I stood there looking all around, trying to find answers, and finding none. At last, I carried it home, but it was the only thing I could think of to do at the moment. The loathsome little dog was filthy and exhausted. It slept in the crook of my arm as I dodged around the far path, away from the doggy people and their looming sociability. As I turned the lock to my door and snapped on the light, I realized how out of place the animal was in my world. Everything was as I liked it, orderly, clean, and though not luxurious, well appointed. I surveyed my leather chair, ripe for the teeth of such a creature, and I shuddered, as well as the petty-point cushions on the sofa with the images of the city so cleverly stitched into them by some craftswoman from whom I bought them at a street fair. These stood out as targets for the nasty animal. The rungs of my antique rocker, my first edition set of Dickens on the lower bookshelf, the cords of my computer, my pristine oriental carpet so recently acquired after 2 years of saving up. Everything was vulnerable. Not to mention the slobber, the mess, the whining, and the hair. Oh, this would never do. What was I thinking? What was I going to do with this creature? A line from Dickens' David Copperfield came to mind as I was regretting my impulsivity. When Betsy Trotwood asks Mr. Dick what she should do with Copperfield, the strange little man replied, "Why, bathe him." It made me chuckle to myself, and that's what I contrived to do. I took the dog to the bathroom and set about bathing him. I made sure the water was warm, but not too warm, and I laid out plenty of old towels to accommodate what I was sure would be tremendous fighting and splashing. I put on a good pair of thick gardening gloves to prevent biting. While I was preparing, I had put the little black dog down on the welcome mat, and the little thing was so exhausted it never moved. Finally, I came for it with my apron on and my thick gardening gloves. I reached for it, half expecting it to go for my throat, but it rolled into my gloved hands and hardly moved at all. I placed him into the tub, and he whimpered with what sounded like relief, and sat patiently while I lathered him up several times and rinsed him with a shower hose. I dried him with an old towel which I wrapped around him and placed him in an old cardboard box which I had and put it near the radiator. The pathetic canine didn't move. Instead, he looked up at me with his coal black eyes, patiently waiting for whatever ordeal I was planning next. I went to the kitchen knowing I hadn't a shred of dog food or anything that could even remotely be considered dog food. At last, I prepared a small bowl of bread and milk for the animal and presented it to him. He politely stepped out of the box and ate until the bowl was empty. He did this 2 more times until I thought it was prudent not to give him anything more for fear of causing the thing to vomit all over the bath. He voluntarily returned to the box, curled up to sleep. Well, this gave me time to clean up the mess I had made and put the old towels into launder. Once that was done, I went to my leather chair, my place of solace, to think. I didn't think long, however. I was apparently tired out from this entire experience, and after only a few moments I went to sleep. I began to awake with a curious feeling of warmth about me. I was completely relaxed, and I wasn't yet fully awake. It was that point that my eyes opened with a start. The dog had crawled into my lap and made itself quite comfortable there. The warmth was its damp, coat from the bath penetrating my clean shirt and trousers. The smell of wet dog attacked my nostrils, and I knew at once I would have to change all my clothes and saddle soap my favorite cure to get the smell out. And yet the animal only shifted in my lap. It had not awakened as I had done. It rolled gently to one side and burrowed itself against my arm in a gesture of total contentment. Well, as much as I wanted to jump up and dump the animal onto the floor, I couldn't bring myself to break its clearly secure happiness. I found myself settling down to allow the dog to sleep while I continued to survey my options. After an hour or two of this, I came to the conclusion that at least for now I had no options. However, I was absolutely resolved not to allow the little beast to destroy my routine, my carefully constructed world. I was absolutely clear with the beast about boundaries and rules. Schedule was an absolute law. There would be no allowances for mistakes or disruptions. I allowed for walks. Walks were kept to 1/2 hour morning and night. The chair was off limits, unless, of course, I was sitting there and then a towel must be placed on my lap to prevent any dirt or hair to rub into my clothing. The animal had his box. I had my bed. This was a non-negotiable boundary. No dogs on the bed at any time. As a minor concession, I moved the box next to the bed to allow the animal the comfort of that proximity, but no more. No treats, no human food, no begging. We could socialize, but I was the boss. About that I was totally clear. When I called a halt, now whatever we were doing, it was done. Trouble was to find an out-of-the-way location and settle down or go to his box. Well, in the ensuing weeks, the animal wrapped itself around my routine. It quite surprised me. He was an excellent guest. He rarely barked, and he never laid a tooth or a claw on my Dickens or my pillows. He was considerably more tolerable than most people I had known, and I found him to be quite a good listener. I found I could share my opinions and concerns quite openly with him. He would listen attentively and seem to understand the entire situation. He'd cock his head as if to say, "Oh, I see. Of course, you're right." After a while, I found I could trust him implicitly. With him, I could discuss all the most deeply held beliefs I had, and he never once expressed boredom or failed to sympathize. In the evenings, he would wait for me to place the towel in my lap before asking permission to rise. This I would grant, and we would listen to music or read, or on occasion, when we could find it, watch something of value on television. He was not at all the little black terror I had witnessed a few short weeks before. He displayed all the civilization of a creature who had been carefully and thoughtfully initiated into the society of man. Perhaps it was the perilous freedom of the park or the degrading example of the other dogs owned by those wretched doggy people, which had caused his rebellious behavior. I was sure that was it, and the soldier was working valiantly, if ineffectively, to correct that behavior. Whatever it was clear that my impression of the animal had been completely erroneous. This was an animal of merit. This was a dog with considerable quality and value, and it occurred to me that the soldier had been a much better judge of character than I had ever guessed. I hope you enjoyed Trouble. It was fun to write, and I think it's kind of interesting to see just exactly the effect Trouble has on our particular narrator. If you enjoyed the story, I hope you'll join me again next time. The next story is going to be a little bit of a change. I'm going to be reading a story called Grayson County Ballad. It's a kind of a Southern Gothic romantic tale. I hope you'll enjoy that, and if you enjoyed Trouble, I hope you'll press like, and you'll subscribe so you'll know when the Grayson County Ballad is ready for you to listen to. Until then, stay well, do good, and I hope to see you next time.